Unaware his wife was pregnant with twins, the Duke mistreated her and got a divorce. He will regret it. The Duke's voice cut through the great hall like a blade. You have failed me, Evelina. Failed me as a wife, as a duchess, and as a woman. Every noble eye turned to Lady Evelina Corwyn, who stood frozen at the foot of the marble staircase. She felt the weight of their stares like arrows through her skin, but she refused to look away from the man who had once sworn to love her. Duke Adrian Westvale was not shouting. No, his tone was worse, calm, precise, and cruel. The kind of tone that made every word sink deeper. You were chosen to give me an heir, he continued coldly, and in 3 years, you have failed. You are a burden to this name, and I will no longer carry the shame of your uselessness. A ripple of whispers filled the air. Women leaned toward one another, fanning themselves to hide their smirks. Men murmured with satisfaction. Scandal was the only entertainment they craved. Evelina's hands trembled, hidden within the folds of her ivory gown. She felt the burn of humiliation climbing up her throat, but she would not cry. Not in front of them. Not in front of him. She lifted her chin. If I am a burden, my lord, it is one you created when you mistook cruelty for authority. Gasps erupted. The Duke's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing in warning. You dare speak to me like this? I dare speak the truth, she said quietly. Something you no longer recognize. For a moment, his composure cracked, but only for a moment. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he signaled to the clerk standing beside him. The marriage contract between Duke Adrian Westvale and Lady Evelina Corwyn is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. The parchment was read aloud, the words echoing through the chamber as if spoken by the devil himself. Evelina stood motionless as the court clerk placed a copy of the decree in her hands. Her ring finger felt strangely heavy, the golden band that once symbolized love now little more than a shackle. You're free then, Adrian said, his voice dripping with mock mercy. Free to return to your family's modest estate and live out your days in peace. I suggest you leave before sunset. She looked up at him one last time. Peace, my lord, is not something you can grant. It's something you lose when you mistake pride for power. The hall went silent. For the first time, there was no triumph in his expression, only unease. Evelina turned, her gown trailing behind her like fallen snow. Each step echoed through the vast chamber until the heavy doors closed, and the whispers resumed like the hiss of snakes. Outside, the sky was bruised with gray. The carriage awaited, its black lacquered doors glinting like obsidian. The driver, an old servant from her late father's household, bowed his head. Where to, my lady? Evelina paused, glancing back at the towering silhouette of the Westvale Manor, the place that had swallowed her laughter and turned it into silence. Home, she said, to Corwyn. As the wheels began to turn, she felt something break free within her, the weight of shame replaced by something sharp and cold. Resolve. She pressed her palm against her abdomen, where a faint ache had troubled her for days. She thought it was stress, but deep down she knew. Something was different. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky in pale gold, she stood before the mirror in her childhood chambers. The reflection that stared back at her was not the same woman who had left for Thornvale 3 years ago. Her eyes were no longer soft. They were steel. When the physician confirmed what she already suspected, his words felt almost divine. You are with child, my lady. Perhaps with two. 2. Her breath caught. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Do not speak of this to anyone, she commanded. The old man nodded and left in silence. Evelina sank into the chair, her hands trembling over her stomach. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. You called me barren, Adrian. And yet, you left me bearing your legacy. She rose, her expression hardening. "You took my name, my dignity, and my peace, but you will never take my strength again." Outside, the church bells began to toll, their sound solemn and distant. In that moment, Lady Evelina Corwyn died, and Evelina of Corwyn Manor was reborn. The first winter after her exile was cruel, but Evelina of Corwyn Manor refused to bend beneath it. The great estate, her mother's ancestral home, had long been abandoned, its once silver halls now cold and dust-laden. Yet she saw in its decay something that mirrored her own ruin, and if she could rebuild herself, she could rebuild this house too. She dismissed pity and sentiment. The servants who remained followed her out of loyalty, not duty. She walked through every empty corridor with determination, ordering repairs, reclaiming rooms, and burning the remnants of her past. Her wedding gown was the first to go, torn, fed to the fire. The gold ring that once marked her belonging to Adrian Westvale was thrown into the river that cut through her lands. There would be no mourning, no tears, only purpose. It was during those long nights of solitude that the sickness began, waves of nausea and fatigue that no grief could explain. She avoided the physician for as long as she could, perhaps out of fear of hope itself. But when she could no longer deny it, she summoned him in secret. He was old, kind, and discreet. When he smiled softly after the examination, her world shifted once more. "You carry life, my lady. 2 lives, in fact." The words echoed through her like a benediction and a curse. She dismissed the physician with payment and silence, then sat before the fire for hours, motionless, the light dancing across her face. Twins. The man who had spat the word barren like an insult had left her carrying not 1, but 2 heirs to his bloodline. The irony was almost divine. At first, she considered writing to him, not for reconciliation, but to deliver the truth like a dagger. Yet something in her resisted. The thought of him knowing filled her with disgust. No, this secret would be hers alone. Her children would not bear the Thornvale name. They would be Corwyns, heirs not to arrogance but to resilience. When the time came, she gave birth in silence. No husband waiting at her bedside, no noble witnesses to herald the birth of heirs. Only the loyal midwife and her trembling hands. A boy and a girl. Evelina held them close, her tears falling at last, not from sorrow, but from something fierce and primal. "You will never know what I endured," she whispered. "You will never need him. You will never carry the name of a man who broke us." She named them Lucian and Althea, light and healing, her redemption made flesh. The months that followed were harsh. She was still weak from the birth, her lands struggling to recover from neglect. But Evelina moved like a woman possessed by fire. She reopened the silver mines that had once made her mother's name legendary. She negotiated with merchants herself, her intellect and ruthlessness quickly gaining her a reputation. They called her the Silent Widow of Corwyn, beautiful, cunning, and untouchable. Some whispered that she had gone mad with grief. Others said she consorted with spirits. But those who met her eyes in the marketplace knew better. There was no madness there, only calculation. Her wealth grew. Her name spread. The same nobles who once whispered behind their fans now sent letters begging for her favor. She answered none. She raised her children with both tenderness and steel. They grew strong, intelligent, and fiercely loyal to her. They asked about their father only once. Althea, curious and perceptive beyond her years, looked up one night from her mother's lap and asked, "Mama, do we have a father?" Evelina's hand froze over the embroidery she was stitching. The firelight flickered in her eyes. "Yes," she said after a moment. "But he chose to live in darkness, and we were meant for the light." The girl nodded, accepting the truth as easily as breathing. Children believe the ones who never lie to them. That night, when the manor was quiet and her children slept beside her, Evelina stepped onto the balcony, the moon casting silver on her gown. "Adrian Westvale," she whispered into the wind. "You called me barren, weak, and worthless, but I have built an empire with what you left behind. And one day, when you come crawling from the ruin you created, I will show you the face of the woman you should have feared." The wind carried her vow into the darkness, and the world would soon learn what happens when a broken heart turns into a blade. The years were not kind to Duke Adrian Westvale. What he had once built on arrogance and gold was now crumbling beneath the weight of his own pride. The woman for whom he had destroyed his marriage, Lady Selene Draycott, proved to be every bit as shallow and venomous as the whispers had warned. Her laughter, once intoxicating, now grated like broken glass. Her beauty, the weapon she had used to lure him, began to fade beneath the constant luxuries and jealous fits that consumed her. Their union, though celebrated by the ambitious and the foolish, quickly soured. Within months, Thornvale's halls echoed with shouting instead of music, with slammed doors instead of admiration. Servants quit. Merchants stopped extending credit. Selene's greed was insatiable. She demanded jewels, gowns, and estates to rival any duchess in the kingdom. Adrian, unwilling to admit his ruin, gave her everything until his coffers ran dry. But debts have a way of becoming public. By the second year of their marriage, Thornvale's creditors came knocking. The proud duke who had once mocked weakness now stood in his own hall, hearing his name dragged through the mud he had created. "Your Grace," one merchant spat, "you were once a man of honor. Now you are a ghost wearing stolen silk." Adrian struck him across the face, not out of power, but out of desperation. When Selene learned the truth of their finances, her fury turned to mockery. So the mighty duke who humiliated his wife for not giving him an heir cannot even hold on to his fortune. How poetic. "Do not speak her name," Adrian growled. Selene laughed cruelly. "I don't need to. Everyone else does." He froze. "What do you mean?" She smirked. "You really don't know? The silent widow of Corwyn. That's what they call her now. Your precious barren duchess, the one you cast aside. She's richer than you ever were." His blood ran cold. Selene's smile widened as she toyed with a strand of pearls. "They say she runs her late mother's mines in trade fleets. Even the crown borrows from her coffers. Some say she has children, 2 of them, a boy and a girl. Twins." The room seemed to tilt. Adrian gripped the edge of the table, struggling to breathe. "Twins?" Selene purred. "Strange, isn't it? You called her barren, yet she managed to fill her halls with laughter while you filled yours with debt." Her laughter followed him as he stormed out, but it was drowned by the roaring in his ears. He mounted his horse and rode through the storm until the manor of Corwyn appeared on the horizon, tall, rebuilt, glowing with torchlight. The estate he had once dismissed as provincial now looked like a fortress of light against the night. He stopped at the gates, drenched and shivering. The guards crossed their spears. "The Duchess does not receive visitors uninvited," one said. "She will receive me," Adrian snapped. The guard's face remained impassive. "She is not a duchess, my lord. She is Lady Evelina of Corwyn, and she receives no one who calls her by your name." For the first time in his life, Adrian Westvale, proud, cruel, and unyielding, felt what she must have felt when he cast her aside. Irrelevance. He turned his horse around and rode back through the rain, but her name burned behind his eyes. The silent widow, the mother of twins, the woman who had built an empire from the ashes he left her in. That night, he sat alone in his study, the fire dim, the silence deafening. He poured wine into a goblet, but it tasted of iron. In the reflection of the liquid, he saw her face, not the weeping woman he had humiliated, but the one who now stood untouchable, radiant, beyond him. He slammed the cup down, spilling red across his desk like blood. "Evelina," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What have I done?" The next morning, he sent word to the capital, seeking confirmation of the rumors. The reply came swiftly. "Lady Evelina of Corwyn has been granted royal favor. Her mines now fund half the crown's naval fleet. Her estates employ thousands. She is, by all measures, among the most powerful women in the realm." Adrian stared at the parchment for a long time before burning it in the fire. The flames devoured the truth, but the truth remained in him, alive, suffocating, relentless. He had traded love for lust, loyalty for vanity, and found himself holding nothing but regret. But he did not yet know the full measure of his punishment. For the woman he once broke had become more than powerful. She had become untouchable. And he would soon learn that some wounds never heal, especially when they belong to the one you wounded most. The first time Evelina and Adrian met again, the air itself seemed to freeze. It was not planned. Fate never needed an invitation to mock the guilty. It happened at a royal banquet, held to celebrate the crown's newest alliance. Nobles from every corner of the realm filled the gilded hall. But when Evelina of Corwyn entered, silence followed her like a shadow. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk, the color of calm storms, her hair pinned with silver thorns. Around her neck hung a single sapphire, cold, radiant, and sharp, like her. Adrian stood at the far end of the hall, unrecognizable from the man she once knew. The proud duke now wore the face of someone who had learned too late what humility meant. The whispers around him were no longer admiring, but pitying. He turned and saw her. For a heartbeat, the entire room disappeared. The music faded, the laughter died, and all he could hear was his own pulse hammering in his chest. He took one unsteady step forward. She saw him, but her expression didn't change. Her gaze slid past him as if he were smoke. When the king approached to greet her, Adrian found himself standing close enough to catch fragments of her voice, low, elegant, and utterly controlled. "Lady Evelina of Corwyn," said the king warmly. "Your counsel and generosity have once again proven vital to the realm." "I merely do what is necessary, Your Majesty," she replied, bowing her head with poise. "Duty does not end where suffering begins." Her words struck him like a blow. Later that evening, as guests drifted to the terrace, Adrian gathered the courage to approach her. She was alone, looking out over the gardens, the faint laughter of nobles fading behind them. "Evelina," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't turn. "My name is Lady Corwyn." The words cut sharper than any sword. I didn't know," he stammered, "about the children, about what I'd done." Now she turned, her eyes like winter glass. "You didn't care to know. That's worse," he faltered. "I was a fool. I see that now." "Do you?" she asked softly. "Or do you simply hate the taste of your own ruin?" He couldn't speak. "I don't need your regret," she continued. "It's worth less than the silence you left me with." Her voice did not shake, though his did. "I only came to see you," he said finally, "and to ask, may I see them?" She laughed, not cruelly, but bitterly, like a blade drawn slow. "You think you deserve that?" "I deserve nothing," he whispered, "but they are my children." "No," she said coldly. "They are mine. They were born of my pain, my strength, and my will. You abandoned their existence before it began." Her words lingered like smoke. Adrian bowed his head. "Then at least let me apologize." She studied him for a long moment, long enough for him to hope, foolishly, that she might soften. But then she said, "You can't apologize for the kind of cruelty that shapes someone. You made me who I am, That is punishment enough." With that, she turned and walked away, her gown whispering against the marble floor like the closing of a door that would never open again. Adrian remained there, staring into the emptiness she left behind. Around him, laughter resumed, the music swelled, and the world carried on, indifferent to the man who had just realized the full measure of what he'd destroyed. And somewhere beyond the city, 2 children slept beneath the same stars, never knowing that their father stood in the same night, wishing for forgiveness that would never come. In the weeks following the banquet, Duke Adrian Westvale could not escape her. Not her presence. She had made it clear that he was beneath her notice, but her influence, her name, her shadow. It lingered in every letter that arrived, every deal he tried to broker, every whisper that crawled through the corridors of power. Her ships sailed further than his armies ever had. Her merchants owned the roads that led to his lands. Her silver funded the king's new fortress, while his debts were carved into stone by his creditors. He had once been the storm that others feared. Now, Evelina was the storm, and he stood beneath it, helpless. When his steward entered one morning with news of another estate seized for unpaid loans, Adrian simply stared into his cold tea. "Who owns the debt?" he asked quietly. The steward hesitated. "Corwyn Holdings, my lord." He laughed bitterly. "Of course it is." He rode to the countryside that day, hoping to think, but every village bore her mark, the crest of Corwyn engraved into the grain silos, the inns, even the bridges. She hadn't just rebuilt her world, she had replaced his. And yet, beneath his humiliation, something deeper gnawed at him. Not just regret, but awe. He remembered the timid woman he had discarded, and he could not reconcile her with the empress-like figure she had become. He wondered how many nights she had cried alone while he feasted, how many times she had thought of ending everything, only to rise stronger. The thought shamed him more than ruin ever could. Meanwhile, at Corwyn Manor, Evelina received the reports of his decline with the same serenity that had carried her through childbirth and betrayal. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply signed the documents and moved on. "His western lands are defaulting," her advisor said one afternoon. "If we move quickly, we can acquire them under the name of your company." "Do it," she replied without hesitation. "And if he comes to plead for mercy?" She lifted her eyes from the parchment. He wouldn't dare. But he did. A month later, Adrian arrived at her estate uninvited. The guards recognized him and hesitated to block the entrance. He was thinner now, his fine clothes worn, his eyes hollow but burning with something desperate. Not arrogance, but need. Evelina met him in the courtyard, not out of pity, but because she wanted to look him in the eyes one last time. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. "I came to return what I took," he said. "The titles, the lands, whatever remains. They're yours." "They already are," she replied. He blinked, realizing she spoke the truth. "Then I have nothing left to give." "You never did," she said calmly. "And that's why I stopped expecting anything from you." He took a step forward. "Evelina." Her voice snapped like frost. "You don't get to say my name. Not now. Not ever." He froze, the words dying on his lips. "I should thank you, perhaps," she continued, her eyes glinting. "Without your cruelty, I might have remained the obedient, voiceless wife you wanted. But pain is a fine teacher. You destroyed me, and I learned to rebuild myself into someone who can never be destroyed again." He swallowed hard. "You've won, then." "This was never about winning," she said. "It was about surviving." Her tone softened just enough to make the next words sting even more. "You'll spend the rest of your life wishing you could undo what you did. And I'll spend mine proving that I never needed you to begin with." She turned to leave, but paused once more. "Oh, and Adrian, the children will inherit my fortune, not yours. They will carry my name. When history remembers us, it will not remember a duke's pride, only a mother's strength." He stood there, silent, as she walked away. Her steps steady, deliberate, final. The gates closed behind him with a heavy thud. For the first time, he realized that some ruins cannot be rebuilt, and some ghosts refuse to forgive. Winter returned to Thornvale like an unwanted memory. The great manor that had once dazzled visiting nobles now stood half empty, its gardens withered, its halls echoing with silence. Duke Adrian Westvale moved through it like a ghost, a man living among ruins of his own creation. There were no servants left to greet him, no letters from the crown, no allies to dine with. His debts had consumed everything, and his pride had devoured the rest. In the quiet hours of dawn, he would sit before the fire and stare at his reflection in the darkened window. He no longer saw the Duke who had once believed himself invincible, only the hollow shell of a man who had traded love for vanity. He had not seen Evelina since that day in the courtyard. Her words haunted him more than any debt collector could. "You'll spend the rest of your life wishing you could undo what you did." And he did. Every waking hour was penance. Sometimes he imagined the twins, the children who would never know his name. He wondered if they looked like her, if they laughed like she once did, before he had ground her joy into silence. He would never know. That was his punishment. When word reached him that Lady Evelina of Corwyn had been named a royal advisor, the highest position a common-born noble could hold, he felt both pride and despair. Pride, because some part of him still loved her. Despair, because he knew she had achieved everything without him. The world now called her the Iron Widow. Her ships ruled the seas, her mines fed the kingdom, and her influence extended far beyond gold. She had become what no woman before her dared to be, untouchable. One night, overcome by loneliness, Adrian rode to the cliffs that overlooked the valley between Thornvale and Corwyn. From there, he could see the faint glow of her manor in the distance, a constellation of torches flickering against the night. He dismounted and stood at the edge, the wind cutting through his cloak. "Do you ever think of me?" he whispered into the dark. "Do you remember what we were before I ruined it all?" The wind gave no answer. It only howled back his silence. He closed his eyes and saw her, not the woman he'd broken, but the one she had become, strong, resilient, free. And though it tore at his pride, he realized that he loved her more now than he ever had when she belonged to him. But love without redemption is just torment. He returned home and locked himself in the old library. He spent hours writing a letter he knew she would never read. "Evelina, you were right. I mistook cruelty for strength. I called your silence weakness when it was the only dignity I ever deserved. I have nothing left to give you, and that is justice. I only ask that when our children, your children, grow, they never become the kind of man I was. If regret could be measured, mine would drown this entire estate. May the gods grant you peace, even if they deny it to me. Adrian." He sealed it, but never sent it. The letter remained on his desk, beside the empty glass of wine, and the fire that slowly burned to ash. Meanwhile, in Corwyn Manor, Evelina lived surrounded by warmth and laughter, not the shallow kind that echoed through Thornvale, but the genuine joy of a life rebuilt from nothing. Lucian had become a strategist, helping her expand her empire, while Althea studied diplomacy and the arts. They were the legacy she had chosen, the proof that pain can birth greatness. Yet sometimes when the night grew still, Evelina would stand on her balcony, gazing toward the horizon where Thornvale's silhouette slept under the fog. She didn't pity him. She didn't forgive him, but she remembered him, as one remembers a storm survived, with both gratitude and disdain. And in that memory, she found strength. Weeks later, word arrived from Thornvale. The messenger, pale and trembling, bowed before her. "My lady, the Duke of Thornvale has passed." Evelina's pen paused above the parchment she was signing. "Of what?" The messenger hesitated. "Loneliness, they say." She said nothing for a long time, then quietly, "Then he has finally met the companion he deserved." The messenger left, and she finished her work without another word. That night, she lit a single candle in her study and let it burn down to the wick. Not for mourning, not for forgiveness, but for closure. As the flame flickered out, she whispered to the darkness, "May your soul find peace, far from mine." Years passed, and Corwyn Manor became the beating heart of the kingdom. What began as a single woman's act of survival had transformed into a dynasty. The silver mines of the Corwyn line now funded the crown's fleets, and merchants across the continent bowed to her crest, a silver phoenix rising from flame. Lady Evelina of Corwyn rarely appeared at court anymore. She didn't need to. Her presence was felt in every treaty signed, every tax lowered, every decision whispered in the king's ear. She had learned long ago that true power did not shout. It was the quiet voice that others obeyed without question. Her children were grown now. Lucienne, 20 and sharp as tempered steel, had inherited her mind. Quick, calculating, strategic. Althea, radiant and fierce, possessed her mother's grace, but none of her mercy. Together, they ruled the estate like extensions of her will. One afternoon, as the spring sunlight poured through the manor windows, Lucian entered his mother's study. He carried a letter sealed with the Thornvale crest, faded, cracked, and old. "It was found among the archives, Mother," he said softly. "Written by the late Duke Adrian Westvale, but never sent." Evelina looked up from her papers. "And why bring it to me?" Lucian hesitated. "Because it's addressed to you." Her gaze lingered on the seal, the mark of a man long dead, the ghost she had buried in silence. Slowly, she reached out and broke the wax. The parchment inside was brittle, the ink faded with time. She read the first few lines in silence. Her eyes did not soften. Her hand did not tremble. She read every word, from beginning to end, then folded it neatly and placed it on her desk. "Do you wish to keep it?" Lucian asked gently. "No," she said. "It belongs to history now." He nodded, waiting for more, but Evelina only turned back to the window. The gardens below were alive with life, children playing, workers tending the flowers, laughter filling the air. "Do you ever regret it, Mother?" Lucian asked after a pause. "Never forgiving him?" Evelina's reflection met his in the glass. "Regret?" she repeated softly. "Regret is for those who doubt their choices. I don't." "But he was your husband," he pressed. "Only by law," she said, "not by heart. A husband protects, cherishes, honors. He did none of those. He was my teacher, the cruelest one, and I learned everything I needed from his cruelty." Lucian said nothing. He understood. That evening, Evelina walked through the gardens alone. The air smelled of lavender and rain, and the setting sun cast everything in gold. She paused near the marble fountain, the one she had commissioned years ago in memory of her mother. The inscription at its base read, "From pain, power. From silence, strength." A group of visiting nobles passed nearby, speaking in hushed tones. She caught fragments of their words. "They say the Lady of Corwyn never remarried. They say she loved no one after him. They say she cursed him to die alone." Evelina smiled faintly. Let them talk. The world needed its stories. And she had written hers in unshakable ink. For every woman who had been silenced, for every heart broken and forgotten, her name had become a banner. She received letters from widows, abandoned wives, and daughters, thanking her for proving that a woman's worth was not tied to a man's approval. She had become more than a duchess, more than a mother, more than a legend. She was a symbol. That night, as she stood by her balcony, Althea joined her, the moonlight soft against her face. "Mother," she said quietly, "I sometimes wonder if I could be as strong as you." Evelina smiled, not the cold smile she gave her enemies, but the rare, gentle one meant for her children. "Strength isn't something you're born with, my dear. It's something the world forces you to find." "Do you ever wish things had been different?" "No," Evelina said. "If they had been different, you wouldn't exist. And that would be the only tragedy I could never forgive." Althea leaned against her, and they watched the stars together, 2 generations bound not by pain anymore, but by triumph. Far away, the ruins of Thornvale Manor still stood, reclaimed by ivy and silence. The banners had rotted, the walls had cracked, and the only thing that remained untouched was the echo of a woman's name whispered by the wind, Evelina of Corwyn, the woman who rose from ashes and never looked back. Time is a cruel sculptor, but it had been gentle with Evelina of Corwyn. Age did not weaken her, it refined her. The silver in her hair gleamed like moonlight, her gaze remained sharp and unyielding, and her voice carried the weight of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. The years had turned her story into legend. Bards sang of the Iron Widow, the woman who rebuilt an empire from betrayal. Scholars studied her strategies, merchants quoted her principles, and even kings sought her counsel before going to war. But for Evelina, legacy had never been the goal. It had simply been the consequence of surviving. Now, in her late years, she walked the halls of Corwyn Manor slowly, her cane tapping softly on the marble. The portraits on the walls watched her pass. Ancestors, allies, and finally, her children. Lucian and Althea, now rulers in their own right, had expanded the Corwyn legacy far beyond what even she had dreamed. Her empire no longer depended on her. That, she thought, was her greatest triumph. One autumn evening, she asked to be taken to the balcony overlooking the valley. From there, she could see the distant ruins of Thornvale, hidden beneath ivy and thyme. The nurse who attended her hesitated. "My lady, the night is cold." "I've faced colder," Evelina said with a small smile. They wrapped her in a fur cloak and left her to the quiet wind. The stars above were bright, the air crisp with the scent of rain. Somewhere far below, the river murmured against the stones. The same river where she had once thrown her wedding ring, so many lifetimes ago. She sat in silence for a long time, listening to the night breathe. Her thoughts drifted to Adrian, not with pain or anger anymore, but with distance, like recalling a name from an old book. He had been the fire that burned her, and she had been the iron that survived it. Without his cruelty, she might never have found her power. Without his betrayal, she might never have understood what freedom truly meant. She whispered his name once, not as a curse, but as a farewell that had been delayed for decades. "Adrian Westvale, rest if you can. I already have." The wind carried her words into the valley, where they dissolved among the ruins. When dawn came, Lucian found her still seated by the balcony, her eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. The candle beside her had burned down to nothing. The kingdom mourned for her, but she would not have wanted mourning. She had never been a woman of soft endings. Her funeral was simple, dignified, and grand in its silence. No eulogies, no tears, only a procession of the thousands of lives she had touched, standing in reverent quiet as her coffin passed. She was buried not beside Thornvale, but in the gardens of Corwyn Manor, beneath a white stone carved with her own words. He took my voice. I forged an empire with the silence. And beneath it, a smaller inscription, added by her children. Our mother taught us that love is a choice, not a chain. In the years that followed, Lucian and Althea Corwyn carried their mother's legacy into a new era. Under their rule, Corwyn became more than a house. It became a symbol. A sanctuary for those cast aside, a haven for women who sought refuge, and a school where girls learned the art of governance and strategy, as Evelina once taught herself in secret. Statues of her were raised across the realm, not draped in jewels or crowned in gold, but standing tall, one hand holding a scroll, the other raised as if silencing the world. Bards sang, "She who was broken became unbreakable," and in taverns and courts alike, women whispered her name like a prayer. But the true monument to Evelina of Corwyn was not made of stone or song. It was written in the hearts of those who had once been powerless and found courage through her story. Her tale was told from mother to daughter, wife to widow, friend to friend, that love betrayed can be survived, that dignity stolen can be rebuilt, and that silence, when wielded with purpose, is louder than any cry for mercy. And so, even as centuries passed and empires fell, her legend endured. The woman who had been cast aside for her supposed weakness had risen to redefine strength. In the end, Evelina did not forgive. She did not forget. She simply transcended. Resilience is not born from perfection. It's forged in pain. Some wounds are not meant to heal. They are meant to remind us that survival itself is victory. Evelina of Corwyn's greatest revenge was not wealth or power. It was peace, the kind that comes when nothing and no one has power over you anymore.